And so thank you so much, Dr. Creasy, for joining us today. We really appreciate it, taking your time out of your Saturday morning. I'll start, well, let me say first that if you want to ask a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask out loud, or you can send it in the chat. You can send it to everybody, and I'll make sure that your question is read out loud, or you can send it to me. My name is Mia, and I'm a third-year medical student at WVU. I'll start you off with a question, Dr. Creasy, if you're ready for it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so for somebody who travels a lot and doesn't have the same environment all the time, so say they're staying in a hotel, or somebody who's going on vacation doesn't have the same environment that they're sleeping in every night, what are some hygiene tips that you could give for them to keep their routine good and that they can get adequate sleep every
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is kind of one of those things that we would troubleshoot and figure out. If it's part of your job, then we have to work around that. And so there are certain things about your environment that you will have control over. So maybe having a relaxing pillow. For me, a good night's sleep is only as good as your pillow. So when I go camping, I don't take the little tiny pillow. I take the huge pillow because that's what works for me. And it basically becomes a conditioned stimulus for getting good sleep. The temperature of the room, the darkness of the room, the sounds in the room. So there are apps that you can use. You can go to YouTube and just find, relaxing sounds. The type of blanket, the amount of blankets you use, do you sleep in your underwear versus pajamas, taking a hot bath or shower before bed. So these are things that you potentially could be doing. Unfortunately, some of the other things you may not be able to control, and with work and travel, that might mean you're going to bed at different hours of the night. And we're just going to have to work around that. I would still try to recommend going to bed and getting up at the same time if possible, but you may need to move those goalposts. If, say, you're used to going to bed at 10, but now you have to go to bed at 12, maybe we kind of dabble with, okay, let's just move everything back a couple hours. So if you were waking up at 6, you're now waking up at 8 from 12 to 8. So you're still trying to get those hours. But if it's just not working, then maybe we have to shrink that amount of time that you're actually in bed sleeping down, so that we want to basically increase the amount of time you're in bed that you're actually sleeping. So there's some troubleshooting involved there, but we just want to control what we can control and just really minimize, again, what we talked about, the screen time, the caffeine, all the things that, and they kind of accumulate to basically getting either lower quality sleep or just lower hours. So I don't know if that helps, because it's kind of based on an individual basis. It depends on what they're dealing with. And so I would encourage getting sleep when you can. We don't want to be taking these long naps right before bedtime. But, if you're going to be on a bus or a train or a plane, again, having that comfortable pillow, having something just to get you to sleep when you can get it. So at least you have something. I did ask for the very first sleep lecture I ever attended. I was a huge napper in college, in grad school in particular. So I would take a 2 to 3 hour nap right around 5 o'clock when we get out of classes, wake up, do a little bit of work, go to the gym around 11 o'clock, eat dinner at 12. This is a sleep expert's nightmare. And so the problem was I wasn't going to bed until about 4, waking up at around 7:30 or 8. And so I would average about maybe 6 to 7 hours, but it was just chopped up throughout the day. And I asked the sleep expert, I was like, well, if I'm getting a total amount of 6 or 7 hours, now for adults, you really want to be aiming for 7 to 8. But she said, you really want to consolidate that down to getting straight through the night if you can. And if that's just not possible, we're going to work around that. And, you try to make it as consistent as you can so your body can predict when it's going to be going to sleep. But again, the hardest patients to work with are the shift workers, where their shifts are constantly changing. Their brain and bodies don't have a chance to really catch up. or the 24-hour folks where it's basically on and off, like on 3 days, off 3 days, or well, actually, that would be really hard. You would never work. So it's like 24 hours, then off, 24 hours on. That's usually the way those shifts would work. I've never seen somebody have to go like 3 days straight. That would be, I mean, you know, in the extreme, like it can actually kill you to not sleep for days at a time. Obviously, it's going to impair your functioning, but there are some examples where people just stayed up. This happens with gamers, where they just stay up. They're so stimulated with their gaming, they don't even realize they're just neglecting basic bodily needs, like going to the bathroom, eating, and sleeping, and their body just shuts down. So, does that answer your question, or do you have any other kind of concerns that related specifically to kind of your needs?
No, that answered my question. I was just asking in general. Another question I have though is, our sleep needs change as we age? And so could you talk a little bit about that? Like, who needs more sleep? Who needs to go on less sleep?
Okay, so the requirements, I'm probably going to butcher this. So they're pretty they kind of vary, but in general, if I were to estimate, like an infant, it's anywhere between like maybe 12 to 18. Really, you want to, they're spending the majority of their life asleep. You know, once they get into maybe like 2-3 years, it's still around like 14, 15 hours. And then they get to preschool age, I think it's like 11 to 12. Elementary, it's maybe 10 to 11. Adolescents need to be getting around 9 to 10. I did see, in preparing for this lecture, I did see 8.5 was adequate. I generally, I just go with 9 to 10, and if they get 8.5, then great. I'm afraid if I offer too low of a bar, they may just go be lower than that bar. So adolescents, I usually say 9 to 10. And the idea behind that is their bodies and their brains are still developing. Their brains are still growing. And majority of that growth is going to be happening during sleep. So we really need to prioritize that. Muscle growth, bone growth, like development. You know, so a lot of times when I talk to parents about, oh, well, they're growing more, you know, that's when a lot of their growth is happening. That really gets their attention because they don't want their kids to be super short. And so with adults, it's generally 7 to 8. Some people just have a higher sleep need. My wife needs 9 to 10. She just does. And that's fine. So you kind of have to gauge kind of where they are. And I read that Michael Jordan could get by on 4 hours of sleep and still score 40 points. And so, but overall, professional athletes, it would be doing themselves or their bodies a disservice if they didn't get enough sleep, because their sports are all about reaction time and strength and energy. And so as we get older, we tend to, when we get into like geriatric populations, they tend to not be getting as much deep sleep. They may be getting as much sleep, but it's not as much deep sleep. So I would say once we get to adults, we don't want to be dipping under 7 if we can help it. And unfortunately, there are extenuating circumstances, and having kids is definitely one of them. So.
All right, well, thank you for that answer. Again, if anybody has any questions to ask Dr. Creasy, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can type your question in the chat, and I'll make sure that it is read.
And Mia, if you could read those off the chat, it's hard for me to read because the sun is so bright out here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, so I have another question, Dr. Creasy. There's lots of new technology out there. It's like to help you with your sleep. So people wear like Apple Watches. There's like this weighted blankets. Do you have any thoughts on things like sleep aids that you could buy that, well, you know, aren't medications?
I'm so glad you brought this up, because this actually is part of, it's not part of CPTI, but you can definitely incorporate it into the intervention. There are all kinds of helpful apps out there. And so, yeah, Apple and Android have these sleep kind of monitors. And I haven't done the research on how effective they are. It tends to be pretty consistent though, in terms of how much they're estimating they were asleep versus how much they actually were asleep. I mean, they're basing it, I believe, on like your body's heart rate. And so, so I think I don't use it as my primary source of assessment, but I definitely do track that. And because at the very least, if they're at a certain level when we started, it's a good at their baseline. It's a good, every session or two to kind of be checking in. How efficient have you been, or how, I guess efficient, it wouldn't be sleep efficiency. It would be more like it does help you understand like your deeper sleep and versus more like superficial sleep. That's kind of, I know what the Apple Watch has been able to show. So yeah, I'll take that information. In addition to using the sleep logs, in addition to just asking them, how did you feel the next day? And there are all kinds of number of ways to be assessing sleep, and we want to use all of them. And so some of the apps that I recommend, I generally try to avoid giving your credit card information. So some of them you can basically get part of it for free, and then if you want to get more, kind of once you're hooked, they have you buy some stuff. I think the Calm app, it's just Calm. I think that one, it has some pretty good relaxed breathing exercises on it. I think you do have to pay after a certain number of, like there are certain additional exercises that if you want to do those, you might have to pay. My favorite app of all time, it's the absolute best in terms of like it's packaged so well. It's called Virtual Hope Box. So it's 3 words, Virtual Hope Box. That's a free app. It's designed by the Department of Defense. It's offered in the government. So that's how I found out about it, but anybody can use it. So first found out about it with military servicemen and women, but as long as you have to download it, and then you have to set like a password, because you're going to be putting some pretty sensitive information in terms of some of the thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And so they lock it so nobody else can see that information. And they're not trying to sell you something, so that's really nice. But it's packaged so well because the idea is it takes a lot of what's worked for the past 40 years and just presents it so easily to be able to easily access. And there's a section on there for distracting yourself, particularly for highly anxious people. So there are just games there to be able to do, just to kind of keep your mind occupied. There's a coping cards section. So basically, you digitally, back in the old days, we had a 3x5 note card. We'd put like the problem and the symptoms associated with that problem on one end, and on the other end, you'd put what interventions are going to use to basically, to work through that problem. And now it's just basically it's all on a screen for you. And so, but the best one of all is the Relax Me one, where it has a deep breathing exercise where it's pacing the breathing that you're doing, where you're following this meter, and it's telling you how to breathe. And it's very customizable. So you can set how much you want the inhale to be, the exhale to be, the pause between breaths, or holding at the peak of each breath, whatever feels natural to you. So for me, I'm usually at about 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale. I generally don't recommend holding for a long time. There will be some natural pauses. I just figure whatever feels natural to you, just do that. And the idea is as you're slowing your breathing down, the rest of your body kind of follows suit. That what is also nice about that particular breathing app is that you can set the background, so you have because you're visually relaxing your mind, through your sight, but you're also relaxing your body physiologically through the breathing. There's an audio portion where you can put your own music. You can use the music they provide. You can have a voice prompt. It's incredibly customizable. Anybody with anxiety problems, I recommend this app. It's my go-to for sleep. So there probably somebody in the audience who's like, well, wait a minute, you just told me don't use screens. Yes, you're right. So I wouldn't recommend doing this in bed. I would recommend, if you can't sleep, put it on the lowest brightness setting, that, use that blue light filter, and do it outside of the bedroom. If you need help just kind of slowing your breathing down, just don't do it in bed. And again, we want to be avoiding screens at all costs. If this particular breathing app is helpful for you, then at least don't do it in bed, and do it on the lowest brightness setting, to try to slow your thoughts and your body and your breathing down. So that's called Virtual Hope Box. And the other cool thing about Virtual Hope Box is, we take pictures and videos. We have thousands of them on our phone, and it utilizes those pictures and videos. So you upload any pictures from your phone that you want to self-select. And then I usually recommend about 10 to 20 for each patient that downloads it. And then as soon as you open that app up, it immediately defaults to a slideshow of a random slideshow of all those pictures that you just put in there. And so at any time, particularly for people who are angry or anxious or even depressed, you click that app. It's almost like you just take your medication, and I say take your behavioral medication. So take your behavioral medication, open that app up. It's immediately going to show you. You don't even have to do anything else. It's going to show you these pictures, which we generally feel better, after looking at pictures, that we've taken, because we don't take pictures of our anger triggers or things that make us anxious. We take pictures of things we want to remember, things that make us feel good. And so it already is trying to get us out of that mode of depression or anxiety or anger or frustration, and it's reminding us of what really matters. And so I think it's ingenious the way they did that. You don't have to press an extra button to see those pictures. It does it for you. So if you're gonna do this though, just get out of bed. Just don't do it in the bed if you can help it. Virtual Hope Box, I strongly recommend it. And it's been my go-to, and I've never had somebody say that did not, or that was terrible. I wish I'd never done it. Some people, it doesn't work as well. They just, for one reason or another, they're not good with technology, or I've never had somebody do the breathing exercise and say, I feel that much worse. Maybe it just didn't help them, but at the very least, you got to look at really nice pictures of, your memories and stuff. And that's generally not going to make things worse. We're not going to take pictures of our messy divorce or the car accident we were in. Well, actually, you might do that for insurance purposes, but hopefully you can get that out. You're not going to put that in your Virtual Hope Box for sure. So you're able to self-select these pictures. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a really, I'm a huge proponent of technology. I think that's where all our fields are going. We've seen this over the pandemic with My Chart Video and how we've been able to do telemedicine visits. That is the future of our field, is more and more technology, and being able to provide services to underserved populations, or under extenuating circumstances, and so that's yeah. So those are the two that I could recommend offhand. There are some well, I'll if anybody has any additional questions about the use of technology, there are some other things that I can maybe suggest. I can send it to you like in an email. But these are things that I'm not necessarily using myself. I found the relaxation apps to be particularly helpful. There are also CBTI has its own app, and so where you're basically logging your sleep, and so it kind of packages it really easy to understand. I haven't really used that, because I like to kind of not go to using apps when I can, because I just use paper and pencil, and that tends to be easier for people. But yeah, there are apps out there for just about everything.
Okay, great. I'm going to start to wrap it up a little bit. If you have to go ahead and leave. We're at the end of the hour. So thanks so much for joining us. But I do have 2 more questions that are in the chat that I just want to make sure I asked Dr. Creasy. And since we're recording this, it'll be posted, the audio portion, to our YouTube channel. So if you have to leave, you can go back and listen to the YouTube recording when it's posted. But the 2 questions that were in the chat, Dr. Creasy, the first was thoughts on melatonin.
So I'm going to preface this with, I don't prescribe, even though that's over the counter. I would first recommend talking to their doctor about that too. And actually, I would kind of loop the doctor in so we can kind of discuss it together. I think melatonin, so just please, I'm not a medical doctor. a PhD. So with that being said, I think melatonin can be very helpful, and it would be my recommendation as the first go-to if we're going to try medication. I am not recommending Ambien right off the bat. That is like the last ditch. If nothing else is working, we've gone through CBTI, and they've done their sleep logs, and it's just nothing's really helping. We might consider that, or I'll talk to their psychiatrist or family doctor about that. The problem with melatonin is it's not meant to be a long-term solution. It's meant to be kind of an as-needed short-term. And what I see people doing is they just start using it because they feel like there's nothing else that's going to work. And even if it works in the short term, I mean, your body might get so used to it, and maybe you have to take more of it, or it just becomes ineffective. And so I think it can be very helpful, and it would be my first recommendation, assuming that their family doctor or psychiatrist or medical doctor is okay with that. I'm going to run it by them first. But that would, I do also would preface any recommendation for melatonin with, let's try everything else first. And we don't want to be doing this as a long-term solution. But yes, in the short term, on an as-needed basis, I think it can be really helpful.
All right. Well, thanks for your insight on that. The other question, and the last question we'll ask to you today, is how can hormone changes affect your sleep patterns?
That's a great question. And it's a little out of my wheelhouse. So I would defer to a medical doctor. But what I do know about hormones, sleep can impact hormones and in terms of like our glucose levels and digestion. And so, and again, I am not, this is not part of my expertise, but this is just kind of my understanding. I would absolutely recommend talking to, like a family doctor, medical doctor about this. But I do know that it can like increase glucose levels if you're not getting as much sleep. So if you're eating the same meal, you're actually producing your glucose levels will be higher if you're not getting as much sleep. And it can affect growth. So we talked about, muscle and bone growth. That's something that we want to be, for children and adolescents, we want to be really focusing on getting as much sleep as possible. But other than that, that's a little out of kind of, I might kind of broach that topic when I'm kind of going over my sleep education, but I don't know enough about, in my training background and education to go into too much detail about that. So a lot of times I'll punt that to their medical doctor.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Neal added it in the chat. She said that
Okay.
she's a pediatrician at WWAFD. She said declines in estrogen are associated with decreased sleep, like during menopause.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for the backup.
I think that helped. Thank you, Dr. Neal, for chiming in there. I appreciate that. All right, Dr. Creasy. Well, thanks so much for giving our talk today. Let's wrap up here. Could you give us 3 main takeaways from your talk today for people that will listen?
Yeah. So I think sleep, it's something we all just take for granted. And so again, anytime I give this talk, the vast majority of audience members feel like they should be getting more sleep. And it's one of the basic foundations for just well-being. That being, the others being, regular physical activity, healthy diet, hydrating throughout the day, regular social interaction. It's just right up there. That's why I always make it a point to get that in during my intake appointments. And so what feels like a pretty preventable issue, it doesn't get really a lot of priority. So I would really encourage everybody to, just preparing for this presentation and think about it. I was just like, gosh, like, why am I not, prioritizing better sleep here? And what could I be doing? And so just think about all the little things, because they add up, that you could be doing throughout your routine, and encouraging your spouse or your kids to be doing. because again, every little thing is every little variable matters. And so the big takeaways are, for particularly in this day and age, it's the variables around kind of that bedtime routine and the stimulus control. So only using the bed for sleep. The screen time is embedded in that. So you don't want to be going on screens before an hour before bedtime, particularly in the bed. Social media that is the worst thing you could be doing before going to bed. So please keep that in mind. Social media is designed to keep our attention and get us worked up, and it's the last thing we need before going to bed. And then the last thing is, if you can't fall asleep, just get out of the bed. Do something relaxing until you feel sleepy again. Um, that sleepy feeling. Don't get in the bed unless you start feeling that sleepy feeling, and just be productive with that time. Do something else. Read a book that maybe you haven't read in a while, or you've been meaning to read, or write. You can journal your thoughts. You can write a letter to somebody. Just do something. It's going to be more productive than just lying there doing nothing. And that's really you're deconditioning yourself to fall asleep in that bed by doing that. So those are my big takeaways. And I've got a handout, Mia, that I'll forward out to everybody. Don't hesitate to keep those questions coming, and if I can't answer them, I'll try to find somebody who can. And I really appreciate your time.
Yes, well, thank you so much again, Dr. Creasy, for being here this morning, walking with us, encouraging us to keep moving and get our 60 minutes of exercise in this morning, and just educating us a little bit more about how we can stay well and get some good sleep. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. If you wouldn't mind, and you haven't already, go ahead and open up the chat, type who you are and where you're walking from. We're just trying to see how far this program is reaching across the state, the country, and even the world. So thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks.